self-hypnosis number 2, another method. Practice it yourself. It's a good thing to be able to teach clients self-hypnosis because, well, think of it, you only see them 1 hour out of every 168 hours in a week. If they're practicing self-hypnosis, they come back, can put themselves into trance. All you have to do is to ask, now, show me how you take yourself into trance. They go in very easily. Now, the first method was looking in the mirror, remember? This second way is to utilize your representational systems, the V, the A, the K. Now sit and look at something that is easy to look at, preferably something that reflects light. Look and then say 3 things to yourself about your visual experience. I see the way the light reflects from the surface. I see a reflection of whatever it is. Now do that 3 times, then switch to auditory and make 3 statements about that part of your experience, the auditory part. I hear the sound of the traffic outside. I hear the sound of someone's footsteps. I can hear the sound of a plane going over, etc. Now move to the kinesthetic. I feel my feet in my shoes firmly on the floor. I feel the warmth of my curled fingers. 3 kinesthetic statements. So now I've made 3 statements about my ongoing experience. Now, maintaining the same position and the same fixed gaze, I go again through each sensory channel and make 2 new statements about each one. 2 visualization, 2 auditory, 2 kinesthetic, 2 different ones. And then 1 statement, with the eyes still open. 1 new statement about each one, one about the V, 1 about the A, 1 about the K. Then close your eyes and repeat with internal visualization what you're seeing, internal auditory, what you're hearing, internal kinesthetics, what you're feeling. Now, typically what happens to many people is that by the time you've reached as soon as you've gone inside, that's when you start to really go deeply, deeply inside, when you're closing your eyes and repeating the VAK internal experiences. Practice. Comes the time with self-hypnosis that you're able to switch off, literally switch off. Now I want you to realize that hypnosis is a very natural process. Everyone goes in and out of it all the time. No one notices. Have you ever been in a lift and it stops and automatically you've gone to get out and then found it wasn't your floor? Watch people in lifts. If they're not talking, they're in a hypnotic state. Almost everyone does that. And if you use things that all of us do, use them in inducing hypnosis, then you'll have people going into trance very easily. And don't use or don't talk about those things that do not belong in the experience for that person. And the things that don't belong are things that are too direct and are not sensory based and are not generally part of an experience. Ideomotor behavior. IMR. Unconscious motor action. Unconscious physical responses. IM responses, ideomotor responses, the unconscious motor responses that occur with all of us, the body actions that occur without our conscious knowledge, the things we all do outside of our conscious awareness, the things that tell the informed observer more about us than we ever can talk about consciously. Now, we've all seen the face of a person when an idea is suddenly grasped. The face suddenly seems to come alive, it lights up. The muscles seem to be fuller, there seems to be much more colour, more life. Now, that's a very obvious example of an IMR, but all inner processes trigger off motor responses. When we access memories, when we anticipate future developments, when we use imagination, when we search for meaning. Now, we've been taught all our lives to pay much attention, a great deal of attention, to the verbal portion of communication, but that's only one aspect. Only one aspect of the entire process of communication. And I'd go so far as to say that the verbal part is the least important part in your work as a therapist. A tremendous amount of information is communicated through the non-verbal aspect of our encounters, of our communication, and this typically takes place outside of conscious awareness of people, most people. Now, by paying close attention to accessing methods adopted by people, and the non-verbal portions of people's behavior, you can pick up a vast wealth of information that more often than not bypasses people's attention, conscious attention I mean. And it is typically something they cannot verbalize about. The accessing methods employed by any person will provide you with an excellent way to identify the representational system being used for a particular strategy. Now, by paying attention to the way people talk with their bodies, you're able to find out a tremendous amount about them. And when you communicate with them using their unconscious behavior, you are able to move into a state of quite remarkable rapport. And further than that, if you use the unconscious strategies of a person, if you present what you want to get over to that person using his unconscious strategies, his own ways of thought, then that person finds what you say to be absolutely irresistible. And it is irresistible to him because that is the way he thinks. That is the unconscious way that he takes himself mentally. Now, there are many non-verbal clues given to you by all people. Watch a person's behavior, whether it's physical or mental activity, and you're able to see and hear the specific sensory processes he goes through in his mental thinking. The indicators that you look for, the clues that you look for, include eye pattern, eye scan pattern, tonal and tempo qualities of the voice, breathing rate and position in the chest, skin color changes, pulse changes, muscle tonus, posture, gesture, and lots more. Now, we've talked about predicates, the process words of speech, and we've talked a little about eye movements. You now know there are certain eye movements made by a person when thinking and processing information. Knowing a person's eye scan patterns in the non-verbal system means that you have a quick and quite remarkably powerful way of knowing which representational system is being used. And because of this, you're able to respond creatively to them. By developing your skill in detecting this wealth of non-verbal language, you will then have an extremely powerful tool for effective hypnotic communication. Predicates indicate to you what a person is aware of. They indicate his most highly valued representational system, his most refined sensory system. Eye scan patterns, the first step of it, indicate his lead system, the first step in his mental strategy. Now, as an example, a person will often say some word or phrase to himself before having a picture come into mind. He'll be aware of the picture, but be unaware of the word or the phrase that he used. The word or phrase led him directly into seeing the picture in his mind's eye, but that word was said out of conscious awareness. That's the lead system. As I look over this, with a deep breath, down right and then left, I get the feeling that something may have been left out. And I have to ask myself, looking left on the same plane, what we can do to have a clear understanding upright. I really don't know what to say about it. Same plane, left. If you were in external sensory awareness and not listening to content, then you would have seen and heard from those few words that a lot was revealed as I look over this, etc., etc. After saying, I really don't know what to say about it, if you then come in with, I'd say it might be a good idea to look at some alternatives and feel them out. That would have helped a person to come to a decision. But there's going to be much more on ideomotor behavior, on the way to note and handle a person's strategy. I want now to briefly discuss ideomotor activity that can lead to the development of a sense of physical dissociation. Now, we all know that ideomotor movements are responsible for the Ouija board, that unconscious or partially conscious wishes are transmitted by unrecognizable ideomotor movements from the fingertips to the glass or the pointer that is used to spell out words. It's also behind the so-called mind reading of stage performers. Hide something, and then have the stage performer take you by the wrist or hand. He, if he's sensitive enough to all the ideomotor movements from your hand, wrist, body movements, etc., he'll find what you've hidden. Now, I know you don't want to use a Ouija board, and you don't want to be a stage performer either, but you want to be a good hypnotist, psychotherapist, a good therapist. Now, IMRs are able, under proper circumstances, to help you, or should I say help evoke interesting and valuable ideas that are unconscious or only partly understood, and those IMRs can be projected into full conscious understanding. In a large number of individuals, the ideomotor response can provide information that is surprising to the consciousness. The surprising information was within the person's system, but not fully recognized or considered by consciousness. The surprising ideomotor responses can provide individuals with access to information or sources of information within themselves that they were unaware of or blocking out for some reason or another. Those ideomotor responses are not necessarily more valid than any other response systems, but they represent another source of information that can lead some individuals to make a more educated choice on some important matter because they now have more complete information from their system. When an individual does not know, or when his consciousness is confused, ideomotor responses can make a very important contribution. When all rational thinking, intuition, feelings, etc. all fail an individual, then ideomotor signaling may be the only clear source of information for decision-making. Because of the high probability that the ideomotor responses have unique sources of information within the individual, it is important to explore them. Now, everyday life is rich, fantastically rich in examples of ideomotor responses. Nodding or shaking of the head, done entirely unconsciously, that's very common. And have you ever caught yourself while doing something entirely automatic, nodding and shaking your head in an imaginary conversation? And every speaker looks to those in the audience who nods in agreement. The wise politician accepts questions only from those seen nodding in agreement. The lifting of a hand and associated movements of the face and body indicate a signal of yes, or of wanting to respond and ask a question. When we get ready to speak, we lift our heads, we wet our lips, we incline the body forward, we focus the gaze. And most people can recognize at a glance whether someone is going to say no or yes or maybe. And in sport you will fare better if you have learned to read your opponent's body language. In everyday life we automatically move our bodies the way we want things to go, even if there's no hope that our movements will help. The passenger in a car will put his foot down on an imaginary brake. Bowlers will tilt their bodies the way the ball should go. And have you ever watched people on bowling greens? Lots more will be said on IMRs during later stages of the course, but now I want to go on to utilizing an imposed motor response. An imposed motor response. It's easy to establish in almost everyone, and it can be used to explore practically any circumstances of interest to the subject and the therapist. Simply requesting ideomotor signaling requires the subject to fixate and focus attention in a manner that is trance-inducing. In the beginning, you have to learn to recognize the subtle indications of trance development. Body immobility, the relaxation of facial muscles, giving an ironed-out look to the face, a fixed gaze, retardation of respiration, pulse, certain reflexes like blinking and swallowing. And if you only use an IMR without going into any formal trance induction, when the period of the IMR signaling has come to an end, you'll notice lots of the signs of a person waking up from trance, readjusting posture, stretching, flexing fingers, refocusing eyes, looking about, adjusting legs, etc. If you question, you'll find that that person will report many idiosensory changes. Drowsy feelings, time distortion, dream state, detached states, sensory perceptual changes. It's a very short step indeed from ideomotor signaling to deep trance. A person who experiences ideomotor signaling moves easily and effortlessly into a deeper trance state. idiosensory responses. That's the unconscious transformation of the thought into sensation. Memory, images are evoked and are then re-experienced as the suggested hypnotic phenomena. What you're doing is using the client's repertoire, something that exists within him, his own mental images and learning. In other words, he's using his resources and capabilities. With ISRs, idiosensory responses, you can alter a pain state, say a headache. Did you ever have one and then something distracted you? Where did the headache go? With a client, you can utilize learnings they have experienced to create anesthesia, and we all have anesthesia of various parts of our bodies. We use it every day. We forget the shoes on our feet, forget a collar around our neck, forget a watch on our wrist. You recognize them promptly when reminded, but they're not in conscious awareness. You can easily use the ISR, idiosensory responses. And lots of uses can be made of the ISRs by using a client's own learnings, his resources, his capabilities. You can alter perception of time. You can change, modify, eradicate pain. Create a condition of selective deafness. Alter visual perception. Create a state of amnesia. Induce relaxation. Induce sensations of cold. Increase or decrease circulation to any part of the body. Anesthetize. Take away a sense of taste or smell, or bring it back if a person has a problem with taste and smell. And going back to IMRs, good use is to ratify trance. People, when they experience a hand or finger raising, it really does ratify trance. It makes them realize they have been in a trance state. Can be an important step in inducing trance. And thanks to memory of previous movements, it can be used, ideomotor responses can be used for hysterical organic paralysis. Get a return of the use of limbs. And I have mentioned that because some people in hypnosis have problems in talking, because in trance, if you talk, generally the trance state lightens, you can use a finger response to get answers. Observation is probably the most important aspect of your training. Observing the how and the why of behavior patterns. Knowing a client's behavior patterns enables you to induce an altered state of awareness. Now, a great amount of behavior patterns are done outside of conscious awareness. Therefore, when a client experiences during the hypnotic state something he couldn't have predicted, he assumes that you, the hypnotist, somehow caused it. He doesn't know that you're able to cause it to happen simply because you know his behavioral pattern. You simply take what you observe and tie suggestions to the behavior. Suppose, for example, you see a slight quiver of the eyelids. That's a time to suggest he will soon blink his eyes. Is the blink reflex slowing? If so, suggest blinks will get slower until the eyes finally close. If he's just exhaled, that's the precise moment to suggest he takes a deep breath. When body movements are slowing, suggest he is becoming immobile and will soon be completely quiet and comfortable. If you continually do this, you become so adept that clients know you are causing change. But with observation, minimal cues from people indicate what they're going to do, where they're going. You ever observed a person walking down the street? How many people slow down at a delicatessen or a baker's? And how many people, if they're interested in radio, hi-fi, television, they slow down on going past that type of shop? And how many people speed up when they're going past a dentist? Watch a person going down a street. You know which house he's going to turn into, because when going to turn into a gate or a door, the clues are all there. When going to speak, the clues are all there. When going to sit down, the clues are all there. And observe a person going to ask a question, slight tongue movement, wetting the lips, possibly a frown, tightening the mouth, slight holding of breath, a leaning forward, a fixed expression, the head is lifted. When we are young, we have much more overt, much more obvious ways of showing what we're going to do. As we get older, they are much more abbreviated, more automatic, much more refined, certainly out of conscious awareness. Regarding a client's problems, our consciousness is programmed at an early age to meet outer standards of achievement, and most of what is unique within the individual remains in abeyance. In other words, most of our individuality remains unconscious and unknown. Erickson. It is important for people to know their unconscious is smarter than they are. There is a great wealth of stored material in the unconscious. Now, people have problems because their conscious programming has too severely limited their capacities. And the solution is to help them break through the limitations of their conscious attitudes to free the unconscious potential for problem solving. Your approach to inducing trance and problem solving should be directed towards circumventing the rigid and learned limitations of a client's conscious and habitual attitude. Later on, we go into altering clients' conscious sets and coping with the unconscious. All these things are designed to free a person from the limitations that he learned a long time ago. Now, one very important thing I want you to be aware of is trance is a special state that intensifies the therapeutic relationship and focuses the client's attention on inner realities. But trance does not guarantee the acceptance of suggestion. Hypnotic suggestion is not a kind of verbal magic that can be imposed on people to make them do anything. Hypnotic suggestions are effective only to the degree that they can activate, block, or alter the functioning of natural mental mechanisms and associations that already exist within the client. You can evoke and utilize potentials that exist, but you cannot impose something totally alien. Bertrand, Despines, Braid, writes a novel, didn't view suggestibility as an essential feature of trance. Lieber did, Bernheim did, and Hull did, and Hilger. The fact is that just because you can hypnotize a person does not guarantee your suggestions will be obeyed. Matching, mirroring, pacing. An important part of your training. A client comes in to see you. And that is when matching should begin from the very first moment. And what do I mean by matching? It really means mirroring what the client is doing, not in an obtrusive way, not in an obvious way, but in a very unobtrusive way so that he doesn't know it is happening. When I talk about mirroring, I mean that you mirror as much as you are able of the unconscious things that the person is doing. Not the conscious things, the unconscious things. He sits down on the edge of the chair. Do the same. After a few minutes, settle back and make yourself comfortable. He'll do the same. You won't have to say to him, settle back. He'll do it automatically, simply because you have mirrored him and then led him into doing what you wanted him to do. Mirroring is powerful. It creates a strong feeling of rapport in the person sitting in front of you. Match him, mirror him in as many ways as possible, and he'll have a feeling that here is someone who understands me. Here is someone I can get on with. And that feeling comes from a deep level, an unconscious level. Now, we've all had the experience of getting on well with a person, of feeling that the relationship is going to be good, going to be rewarded, going to be rewarding. And we're not surprised when it turns out just like that. Between us and the other person has been a pleasant feeling of rapport, a feeling of instant liking and trusting. And we'll never know how much of that feeling of rapport is simply because the other person has unconsciously been matching them. And I don't mean by predicates, but by other items of body language. Let me talk a little about things that you can match. You are doing it consciously. He is observing it, becoming aware of it on an unconscious level. So match very discreetly. Do it in an obvious way, it will come into his consciousness and he'll tend to reject it. Body posture, movement, gesture, tone and tempo of speech, breathing if you can do it. That's just a few. It isn't easy in the beginning. It has to be learnt in small, easy stages. Subtly you tune into the person so that he has a feeling of rapport, a deep-seated conviction that you can and will help him. He's influenced more by these non-verbal messages than by the verbal ones. He's had a lifetime of functioning in a certain way. Match him and you're moving, living with him. Two things are most important to match. Predicates. And we have covered that a little, and I hope you're practicing like mad to hear the predicates used by people around you. The other thing to match is breathing, as I just mentioned. Breathing can be difficult in the beginning, but it's well worth training yourself to match in this way. With some people it's easier than with others. Don't try to match if the other person's breathing is hopelessly out of step with yours. If it's too fast for you, then you can unobtrusively tap your foot or your finger to keep the time of his breathing. That's called crossover mirroring. Breathing, matching breathing is very powerful. So that you're able to establish a good trance state, all representational systems should be involved to a certain extent. The ideal way to begin this process is by pacing, and this is communicating with the conscious mind, the dominant hemisphere. To be successful, you'll have to be in external sensory awareness, really observing what is happening to the client, and then describing the experiences you know by your observation he is having. He's sitting opposite you, eyes open. As you talk, you know he will experience changes in visual perception. He defocuses and stares through what he is staring at. Mention that he is experiencing this. If he stares for a long time without blinking, talk about how the blink reflex changes. Mention how the eyes get tired with almost all people when they stare, in fact with every person really, when they stare for any length of time at any object, and how the eyelids get heavy. And do notice how pleasant and good and restful it is when one closes one's eyes. Talk about the immobility of the good hypnotic subject, and how usually when one sits for some time there is a tendency to want to move and make oneself more comfortable. And watch to see if there's any movement. The eyes close eventually. Watch the breathing. When it slows, and it will do, then comment on it. I notice that your breathing has changed. Maybe you hadn't noticed this with your conscious mind, but you knew all about it with your unconscious mind. And I can tell your conscious mind something your unconscious mind is already aware of. Your breathing and your pulse beat and your blood pressure are very intimately connected, and so since your breathing has slowed, then your pulse beat has also slowed, and your blood pressure has also changed just a little bit. Now your unconscious mind knew all this, which your conscious mind did not know. But it really didn't have to know, because it knew the unconscious knew. And the unconscious knew the conscious didn't know, but knew it was all right, because it knew, and knew also that it would inform the conscious if the information was ever needed. And talking about a good hypnotic subject, you can observe how pleasant it is to be still and just listen to the sound of my voice. Meet the client where he is. Accept what he is showing you as the intelligent observer, and then utilize it, and the way to utilize it is by leading. Not trying to force him into something to get him to deny what he may have noticed. For example, talking about being relaxed when he isn't, and he knows he isn't. If you do this, you'll promptly encounter resistance. And have you heard hypnotists talking about this special state that seems to be reserved for hypnotists? Resistance. If the client doesn't do what the hypnotist suggests, then he is being resistant. Go to meetings and find that hypnotists all over the place are encountering resistant clients. It appears to be a natural hazard. Mind you, if you use what you're now being taught, strange to say, you'll find that resistant levels seem to go away with most people. Go to the client's present experience, mention it, and lead on from there, and you'll get a positive response. In hypnotic inductions and in inexperienced, poorly trained hypnotists will all too often try to direct a client into behaving in a way he thinks the client should behave. Now, I'm firmly of the opinion that the client should have the very minor role in hypnosis, and that the subject should have the very major role. But let's go on to this leading, and let me just take one aspect of leading, breathing. If, or should I say when, he has his eyes closed, then match the breathing a little more audibly than usual. and slow down your breathing. Watch his breathing slow down to follow yours. Or I match the tempo of your breathing with the tempo of my voice, and I will speak with the rise and the fall of your chest. Do that for a time, and then slow the tempo of your voice. You'll achieve a slowing of his breathing. In addition to breathing, as you're talking, watch his face, his expressions most carefully. Let's say you're talking about childhood experiences, not necessarily his, maybe yours or someone else's. If you see rapid eye movements and his breathing going higher into the chest, then he's visualizing. Talk about what you know he is experiencing, but make it absolutely non-specific. Talk about enjoying that specific experience. Really enjoy it. Really seeing it. Behavior patterns, each of us as a human being is continually subject to enormous amounts of information. Now, the amount of information available from our ongoing experience greatly exceeds our ability to sense our experience consciously. In fact, much of the process of learning and growing is our ability to sense pattern in our experience and to develop programs within ourselves to cope effectively with the world at the unconscious level of behavior. For example, your ability to listen and understand what I'm talking about is a program which at one point in your life you were unable to perform. You had to go through lots and lots of steps before you were able to do what you can now do so easily, so unconsciously. Your skill in listening and understanding depends in large part on your ability to operate unconsciously these early learning patterns. Now, the vast bulk of our everyday life is occupied with the execution of tremendously complex patterns of unconscious behavior. And the ability we have to enjoy our experiences would, in large part, be lost if we didn't have the ability to program ourselves to carry out certain complex patterns of behavior at an unconscious level. Imagine what life would be like if we had to consciously think before we could walk, talk, drive, eat, make love, to name just a few of the many, many things we do automatically. Now, the process of creating programs which are useful to us, the learning process, is an ongoing process of change, or it should be. And this process can be called modeling. And it occurs both at the conscious and the unconscious levels of behavior. The process of learning to understand and speak is an example of unconscious modeling. The process of learning to spell and read is, for most people, an example of conscious modeling with the use of patterns of behavior which already exist at the unconscious level. As an example, children learning to spell are not explicitly taught to form mental images of the words they are learning, that is, using their visual strategies. Yet children who succeed in becoming excellent spellers use this strategy unconsciously. The ability of anyone to be excellent at anything that is being attempted depends on the utilization of skills, strategies, patterns already available at an unconscious level of behavior. Now, the outcome of modeling is the creation of a series of models which are mainly unconscious, which each of us use to organize our experience and cope effectively with our worlds of experience. And those models which we use for our behavior will of a necessity differ from the world of experience which they are models of. But let's go over to what it is that each of us as human beings detect, and what you detect as a hypnotist. With your sensory channels, what you detect is difference. One easy demonstration of this is that, until now, you have not been aware of your left ear. And the fact that you are not conscious of it is perfectly consistent with the known patterns of human modeling. and that is principally because of two things. One, a conscious awareness of your left ear while you were listening would have meant that for a few moments you would not have been able to hear what I was saying. And two, the location of your left ear in respect to the rest of your body hasn't changed. And so, because there has been no difference to detect, there was no reason for it to enter conscious awareness. And the same applies to many actions, many behaviors. We go into a dark room at night and put up our hand to switch on a light, and we so often do it unconsciously, automatically, without it really registering. It's only when this unconscious pattern in our behavior fails to achieve what we unconsciously anticipated that it comes into our awareness. And it enters because of the difference in response to our action. Now, what has this to do with you as a hypnotist? Lots of things. One of them being confusion. Remember when I talked of meeting someone on a corner? Normally you dance back and forth and then both stop. Both smile weakly and then both move the same way again. Had you thrown Erickson was in practice for over 50 years, and he didn't have resistant clients. I think the reason must have been for one of two things. Either he selected his clients very well so that he didn't take resistant clients, or he did something that other experimenters weren't doing. I think the latter explanation is the most applicable. He watched a client very carefully and then used hypnosis in a way that he knew they would respond to. He took note of breathing patterns, muscle tonus, eye movement, skin color, and all the physiological signs that accompany mental activity, mental involvement. Now, the basic principle of achieving successful hypnosis induction is to know what signs the person is showing in the waking state, know what the common signs of trance are, and utilize everything presented by the person so that he is led smoothly into an altered state of awareness. This means that you have to match a person, mirror him, pace him, and then lead him. You note and then match the unconscious body language presented to you, and using that unconscious body language, lead him into an altered state. When watching a client as you carry out an induction, if you see signs of trance developing, carry on. If those signs are not developing, do anything else. The majority of people experience a pattern of in and out. They go in and out of hypnosis, in and out, in and out. Take it into consideration in therapy, then you'll be able to work hypnotically with anyone. If you work with a person's ongoing behavior, then you lead him smoothly into change. But to go again into the signs of developing trance state, immobility, defocusing of eyes, dilation of pupil, change in facial musculature, smoothing out, a loss of blink reflex. Even with the eyes closed you'll see this loss. And you'll get some people who have eyelid flutter. This shows that they're on the verge of entering an altered state. The swallow reflex goes, breathing slower, more even. So when a person is coming out of trance, you'll see the opposite of all these. And if someone is not out of trance even when their eyes are open, then you won't see this return to the waking state. If a person comes in with a perpetual smile on his face, which smooths out in the trance state, the smile doesn't return when the eyes are open and you have finished talking, then you'll know he is still in trance. Now remember that with Ericksonian hypnosis it is not important that a person listens to you consciously. That isn't where learning takes place. If he listens to his own unconscious knowledge, then he's able to learn. That's where a lot of problems come in. A person is not in touch with his own resources and capabilities. hypnotic induction, indirect. All right. Settle back. Let your eyelids close over your eyes. I'll just talk. And I'll talk about this altered state of awareness that we call hypnosis. Now, lots of people have lots of ideas about what hypnosis is, and some think that it is a state whereby a hypnotist makes a person unconscious, and then that person can be made to do things that he or she wouldn't do if fully conscious. And others think that it is a state of drowsiness, rather like the stage one goes into just before sleep. And then again others think that it's not much different from the normal state. But hardly anyone realizes that it is a really special state, whereby a person can learn to look at and feel things differently from normal. And that is an ability that all of us have. The ability to look at and also to feel things differently. And we learn this ability when we're very young and very small. And when we first learn this ability, it's charming to watch. We bend over and look at the world from between our open legs. All children do. Just as you did. And in that moment when you first saw an upside-down world, you really learnt that you can look at things in a different way. And that is one of the things you are able to do in the hypnotic state, to look at things in a different way. But learning started a long time before that, before you did that, a long time before you did it. And the learnings you had were on an unconscious level. And when you were very young, when you learned to walk, although you didn't know it at the time, when you first stood on your own 2 feet, you built a very strong foundation. From that foundation you were able to stand, to walk, to run, to jump, lots of activity. And that foundation you built a long time was only one of many, just as another one was. When you first learned to talk. And as you learned, first of all with sounds in the throat, and then simple words, and then simple sentences, and then suddenly quite complicated sentences. You didn't know that you were building a firm foundation for all of your encounters in the future. And you didn't need to know, although you may have been aware of it on a very unconscious level, as you were aware of so many things. But whatever it was that you learned, all through your life, you built up many, many pictures, images, memories we call them. And they're all there, ready for you to look at whenever the time is right, whenever you would really like to. And this learning that you've done all your life, and there was another powerful time of learning, and that was, and it could have been a little bit worrying, when you first looked at the alphabet. And I don't know if it was when you went to school or before then, but it was quite a time of learning. how does one make sense or learn these strange little shapes that people call the alphabet? Learning to look at the larger letters, what they call the capital letters, the differences, and yet some of them look rather alike, really. Like the capital O and the capital Q, they look just like each other, and yet one of them has a curly tail. And the letter A and the letter H, they look a bit the same, but one isn't closed in at the top. You know, lots of thoughts go through the mind of someone who is very young and very small when looking at the alphabet for the first time. And there are lots of memories, lots of pictures, and they're all there in your unconscious mind. And there are pictures of the little letters, the little letter B and the little letter D. They're the same, really, and yet one's backwards to the other. And that little letter that they call the P, is it an upside-down B or an upside-down D? And there are lots and lots of thoughts. And isn't it interesting to know that all the books in the English language are only made up of those 26 capital letters and those 26 small letters? Made up of just those letters that you learned when you were first at school. And what was it like when you first went to school? Now, what a time that was. Lot of children, and a strange new adult looking after you in the playground. So many impressions, so many memories, and why not just sit there very quietly for a few moments and have good memory, happy memory, pleasant memory? All right now? All right. Realize where you are. Realize entirely where you are. And let all parts of you, internally, externally, function efficiently and well, and in your own good time. let your eyes open and be very alert, quite wide awake. There is one very direct method to obtain an ideomotor response, and the subject is to be seated, one hand resting on the thigh. The non-dominant hand is often the best to use. And ask the subject, ask him to stare at the back of his hand, listening carefully to what is being said. Spread the fingers, and it might be an idea to test the arm to see whether it's reasonably relaxed, and also to test the fingers to see that they are also relaxed, and then start talking. What I want you to do is to be aware of your hand. Watch with interest and listen carefully to what I say. You don't have to move. You don't have to nod your head. You don't have to make any movement at all. You don't have to speak, and really you don't even have to think. Just watch your hand and listen to what I have to say. Listen very carefully to what I have to say. I'll talk for a few minutes. And I want you to be very aware of what is happening in your hand. Although, really, it's not what is happening in your hand that is important. What is important is that you are able to concentrate your attention on what is said, and without moving, being able to be aware, being able to sense what is said. So, be aware of your hand. And without moving your fingers, without moving your hand in any way at all, without moving your thumb, be aware of the material underneath your fingertip. Is it rough, or is it smooth? Be aware. You've handled that material quite a few times, so you know what it really feels like. Now, try to be in your fingertips, and without movement, sense what is underneath. Sense the feeling of the material. Now the next thing is much more obvious. When two parts of the body are touching, like the hand on your thigh, there's a feeling of warmth develops between them. So by now, the palm of your hand should be just a little bit warmer than the back of your hand. Not much. Not much of a temperature difference, but there's a little temperature difference. That means, of course, that the back of your hand is a little bit cooler than the palm of your hand. Be aware of the difference. Be very aware. Now let me tell you 3 different things that other people sense in looking and listening carefully and staring at the back of their hand and sitting quite still. 3 things that when I suggest them, some people become aware of experiencing. The first thing, on mentioning it, they become aware that the arm and the forearm of the hand they are looking at seems lighter than the other arm, the other forearm. which of course means that the other forearm is a little heavier than the one you're looking at. Now, I don't know whether or not you're able to experience that feeling, that light feeling. A slight weight difference between the arm you're looking at, the hand you're looking at, and the other arm and the other hand. Other people, when I mention it, when I suggest it, become aware of a throbbing or a pulsing feeling in the hand. Just a gentle, more like a pulsing feeling. And it can be anywhere in the hand, but often it's between the thumb and the first finger. Maybe because it's more open there. Be aware of it, a gentle, pulsing feeling. Maybe you can sense that. But there is a very common thing that people experience when it's suggested. And it's a tingling feeling somewhere in the hand. A light, tingling feeling that can be anywhere. It can be in the back of the hand, the palm of the hand, the thumb, but usually in the fingers. And when it's in the fingers, more often than not, it's in the first finger. Might be because we're very aware of that finger, because we use it so much. We often point with it. We can trace things out with it. And if we're looking down a list of names or numbers or addresses or any list at all, we often use that finger as a guide. It's got a few names too, that finger. Index finger, first finger, fourth finger. Some people refer to it as the finger of power. But be aware of that finger. Be very aware of that index finger, the one next to the thumb. Be totally aware. Almost as though that's the only finger that exists. Because with a few people, very few, on a first call like this, that finger begins to feel very different. Very different indeed. A totally different feeling develops in it. It's a light, weightless feeling. Quite a light, weightless feeling, quite light, quite weightless. Light and weightless. And as you watch and listen, and when the unconscious mind is ready for the action, the finger is so light and weightless it begins to move ever so slightly. And then it begins to lift itself up into the air, off the leg, into the air. It isn't a conscious motor action. It's an unconscious motor action, an ideomotor response, an I-M-I. And the secret is not to make it happen, not to stop it happening when it wants to happen, but just let it happen. And we can both sit still and quiet and watch with interest. And your unconscious mind can take control of your index finger, your first finger. The thing to do now is to, if the finger hasn't lifted, just to sit quiet for about a minute or so. If the finger lifts, then right. It's all right now. Let your hand be as it was. Let it relax. Let it be as it was before you started to look at it. No pulsing, no throbbing, no heaviness, no tingling, no lightness or weightlessness. Just a normal right hand. If there is a finger If there's no movement from the finger after the maybe minute or so of quietness or silence, then that's all right. Not really necessary for the finger to lift. Not necessary at all, really. The only important thing is your awareness, your ability to be aware of the differences, the changes that could have occurred in your hand. That's the only thing that really was important. But now let your hand be exactly as it was before. There's no pulsing, no throbbing, no heaviness, no tingling, no lightness, no heaviness. It's just normal right hand. So now you have to bring the person out, and the way to bring the person out is to make certain that the person is aware of the fact that he or she was relaxed. And you can ask questions afterwards. What were you aware of? All right, not so much about your hand, but what were you aware of external to yourself? Did you hear the traffic passing? Did you hear this noise or that noise? What did my voice sound like? Did it sound different after a while? Did you find yourself drifting away? Tell me exactly what you experienced. Find out. Find out what the person experienced. Then when you go into a hypnotic state, you're able to when you start talking about hypnosis and ask the person to close the eyes, you can feed back to the person what you found out. It's a fractionation technique. But all people can give an ideomotor response. Sometimes it takes a little longer than others, but all people are capable of giving an IMR, whether it's a finger or hand raising or a head nod or what. One good thing about the ideomotor response, if you get a finger raising, the people are so startled by it that it's a wonderful ratifier of trance. They know that they are in an altered state. Never forget that with indirection, not saying anything directly, but saying in a very indirect manner, using an open-ended indirect suggestion, that's the sort of thing that allows the client many possibilities of response. The client's own unconscious can select what is most appropriate. We all have potentials we are unaware of. We usually don't know how they will be expressed. A suggestion like that gives a great deal of freedom to explore and express the client's own individuality. But it also carries a strong implication that a therapeutic response will occur. Open-ended, indirect suggestions are so vague to the conscious mind, but so powerful to the unconscious mind, simply because of the internal search that has to be carried out to make sense of what you're saying. That search, of course, is carried out on an unconscious level. One of the interesting things in trance induction, and this has really to do with patterns of behavior patterns of people. Interesting thing is that after a short time you sometimes can begin to, or start to wonder, what is keeping this person out of trance? Trance is a very natural experience. It's something which happens without effort. It has a wonderful flow about it, flowing from external awareness to a deeper inner awareness. And where it is obviously a problem for the person sitting in front of you, then you should start querying, why is this person still in external sensory awareness? realize it can simply be because of a disruption of a normal pattern. Regarding yourself, notice what happens when an habitual pattern is disrupted. Phenomena of hypnosis. Great deal of phenomena. I've talked of the body immobility, the changes in breathing, changes in pulse, swallow reflex, alteration, eye blinks, and lots of other things. But in addition to that, some of the other phenomena is amnesia, rapport, catalepsy, ideomotor activity, idiosensory activity, dissociation, hypomnesia, memory recall, glove or stocking anesthesia, revivification, age regression, age progression, analgesia, negative and positive hallucination, somnambulism. That, by the way, appears awake but is in deep trance and can do normal things. Automatic writing, dream induction, time distortion, and of course the ability to respond to post-hypnotic suggestion. I suppose really there are three principles of hypnosis. One, a law of concentrated attention, law of dominant effect, law of reversed effect. Reversed effect is quite interesting. It's really what is experienced by a lot of people when they go to bed and try to make themselves go to sleep. They become more and more wide awake. Reversed effect. A direct suggestion appeals to the conscious mind. And if we're in agreement with the suggestion, have the ability to carry it out, then the suggestion is successful and we carry it out in a voluntary manner. If I suggest, please close the window, you'll close it if you think it's a good suggestion. If the conscious mind was able to carry out all types of psychological suggestion, then psychotherapy wouldn't be needed, because any sensible person would be able to suggest that people with problems should give up the problem, the phobia, anxiety state, or what have you. That would be the end of all problems. But it obviously isn't that simple. Psychological problems exist because the conscious mind doesn't know how to create the change necessary to remove the problem. In many situations there is the capacity for change, but nothing can occur without the help of an unconscious process that takes place on an involuntary level. We can try hard to remember a name, but we have to cease trying very often. before the memory or the name pops up into our awareness. Now what happens? We struggle to remember a name, and then eventually we give up, and then any time after that the name can pop up. Obviously a search was carried out on a conscious level, but it could only be successfully completed by an unconscious process carried out on its own, even after consciousness abandoned the effort. Now, monitoring experiments carried out suggest that an unconscious search continues at the rate of approximately 30 items per second, even after the conscious mind has gone on to something else. But now, indirect suggestion. Indirect forms of suggestion are approaches to initiating such searches on an unconscious level. It is a way to initiate an unconscious search for a solution to a problem. Now, the old idea, as I said before, was that the subject passively did what the hypnotist asked. By droning on and repeating the same suggestion over and over, the subject was programmed to accept one fixed idea. It was a very naive view, really, of direct suggestion being able to make a subject do what the hypnotist wanted. Well, of course, direct suggestion has its place in therapy, but, and it's a big but, the thing to really remember that it isn't what the hypnotist says, but what the subject does with what is said that is important, the essence of suggestion. In hypnotherapy, the words of the therapist evoke a complex series of internal responses in the subject, and these internal responses are the basis of suggestion. These internal responses utilize the subject's unique life experiences and learning. Indirect suggestion doesn't tell a person what to do. Rather, it explores and uses on an unconscious level what is within the person without a conscious effort of direction. Indirect suggestions automatically evoke unconscious searches and processes within us, independent of conscious thought. Indirect suggestions are most useful for exploring potentials that exist in all of us and create conditions which enable us to utilize those potentials rather than imposing control over behavior. Now we know that the mind is in a continuous state of growth and change. Creative behavior is in a continual process of development. To make effective use of the mind, direct suggestion, direct programming, whereas it can influence behavior, doesn't help to explore and use a person's unique potential. On the other hand, indirect, the interspersal approach, is an excellent way of presenting suggestions so that the subject can unconsciously respond and utilize the suggestions in his own unique way. Let's talk about just two facets of indirection. One, focusing of attention through indirect association. And two, focusing of attention through indirect associations of motor movement. One, that's the focusing of attention through indirect association, is really a basic form of indirect suggestion whereby one raises a relevant topic without directing it in an obvious way to the subject. As an example, the easiest way to get a man to talk about his wife is to talk about one's own wife, or wives in general. A natural indirect associative process is set in motion within the man that brings us up apparently spontaneous associations about his wife. Since you don't directly ask about his wife, the usual limitations don't apply. Limitations of conscious sets, habitual mental frameworks, even psychological defenses, all those things that a direct question might evoke don't apply. In therapy, we can use this process of indirect association to help a person with his problem by anecdotes, stories, metaphor of other clients, all sorts of things in seemingly casual conversation. If this common focused association material has a relevance to the client's problem, then that client is able to think more freely, talk more freely, in a surprisingly revealing way. Now, if you as the therapist haven't hit on the correct indirect associative material, then the subject simply won't talk about the focused association, because nothing has been triggered often. One excellent thing about this interspersal approach is that you, as a therapist, avoid imposing your own views on the client. You avoid interpretation. If there's anything of value for the subject in what you say, then he will respond. If there isn't anything of value, nothing is lost. But if it is of value, he will recognize it and is able to use it to help with his problem.